experience, so I'm glad for this opportunity to
Sure.
get educated a little better. And why don't we do introductions, because there's a fair chance that you'll be having association.
Oh, sounds good.
I'm Diane Keene. I've been a volunteer for 2 years.
Okay.
Susan Duncan, and I've been here 2 years also.
Oh, cool. Been here forever.
Oh. Almost.
A while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
I'm Donna Massou. I'm new as of October.
Awesome. Great.
Mary Grant, about 8 years, I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And Bill?
Alan Stricker, I am also new.
Oh, you are? Oh, wow. Great.
And I'm Pam Young. I've been here for about 5 years, and I work with Bill in the program.
Okay. Great. I was telling you it's probably not my best side.
I was trying to think if I could move
Let me
it.
just pass these out first and take some. This is just sort of a fact sheet. Oh, I guess I should tell you who I am. That would be good. Like I said, Kim Gardner is who I am. I'm the lead clinical supervisor of Intermountain Community Services. And a lot of people don't know about Intermountain Community Services. We're real kind of famous or known for our flagship, the Residential Treatment Center, top of Lambourne and the Festival of Trees. That's sort of how Helena knows Intermountain. But actually we serve, last year we served like 1,200 kids in the community. So we have community-based services, which includes an outpatient clinic that has psychological assessments and neurofeedback and DBT and some outpatient therapists. And then we have our psychiatric clinic, which has a psychiatrist and then 2 nurse practitioners that do evaluations and management of psychiatric medications for children and adolescents. And then we have a therapeutic program for in-home services for any family, kinship, adoptive, foster, birth. So for going actually in the home and helping parents deal with all kinds of things.
How long is your program?
I started this program. This program in Montana is older than when I started, but I started this program 5 years ago, and it's actually been up and running strongly for 4. So, so school-based. It's called school-based services. The Medicaid word on here is comprehensive school and community treatment. So they say CSCT. So when we all went to school, there were school counselors, and you'll see school counselors in schools. And depending on the level, the grade level, you'll see some school counselors really working on affecting the life of the school or the heart, the culture of school, so anti-bullying, friendship skills, taking care of, making sure that kids have all their needs met and families are identified and referred out. And then the older the child gets, the more it becomes guidance counseling. So in the high schools, you'll see less of the one-on-one counseling, and it'll be more like guidance counseling, preparing for adulthood, transition programs, special needs, and college prep, those kinds of things. So school counseling is not what this is, but that's when we grew up, that's what we thought of this. So a lot of people hear CSCT or school mental health or school counseling and they go, oh, I know what that is, but it's really different. So this program was invented by the state about 10 years ago or more. And their first run at it, it was a combination or combined effort between Office of Public Instruction and then DFS and now the Bureau that we work with is Children's Mental Health. So they combined forces and said, what can we do to provide mental health services for kids on site at the school? And there were 3 other states at the time doing it. So how can you take mental health services to the school and be available? Because what they could tell easily was that kids are more likely to access services if they need it, if their parents don't have to take time off work, find a therapist, drive them to an appointment, drive them back, and then orient the youngster back into the classroom. So that was the original design, is how do we meet the needs of the kids in a way that is useful and really makes sense to kids and families. That was the original design, and still has many of that basic core principles. Well, they funded it in a very funky way. And they didn't fund it according to need or individual treatment plans. They funded it on a per capita. So each child got so many hours of service per month, and that was it. So it wasn't dependent on what a child needed. The OPI, Office of Public Instruction, and Public Health. So their first design was, we have this much money we're spending, let's see how we can do it. So they divided it among children and said a team, which is a therapist and a mental health specialist, bachelor's level and master's level therapist, can serve this many kids, and each one gets a certain like budget, so many units. And that didn't work because some kids need little and some kids need a lot. It quickly didn't work. So in a 2-year cycle, they recognized that that wasn't really realistic, and so they refunded it. So some people were around in those days, and it was a kind of a tough deal. Helena School District became their own mental health center and tried to administer it. It was very funky in the funding. So then it died down for about 1.5 years, and it kind of reflourished. Everybody went back to the drawing board and said, well, you know, what really makes sense? And what really makes sense is really individualizing and finding out what each child actually needs, what are the concerns, and then what kind of resources does that child have? Because a child may have extremely high mental health needs or distress, emotional distress, we say. But they might have a lot of resources and they don't need so much. Maybe they just need a check-in in the morning and at lunch and they're okay. And maybe there's another child with less intense needs, but they have no resources. So no one at home, or no sober parent at home, or no environment, and they need a lot, but their mental health disorder might be different. So that was a good move. So they regrouped. And so the model we have right now is the one that has lasted, and right now I'm on a committee where we're looking at, is it still working, and do we need to fine tune, and what is working, what do we want to preserve, and what, you know, kind of rules can we make that work across the state, from a high school in Billings to one in, you know, on a reservation maybe, so, or a small town. So it's constantly being evaluated. So let me tell you a little bit about the structure of it, and then that might inspire some questions or comments. So this thing that you have, handout, is really just, honestly, it's the administrative rule and law put into layman's terms. That's all this is. So school-based services is a way under how the legislature formed it, that a public school district can contract with a licensed mental health center to provide mental health services inside the school building year-round. So non-school days and regular school days. And so mental health services under this model is a therapist, master's level therapist, and that bachelor's level specially trained mental health specialist, and they're a team. Typically that team has between 10 and 15 youngsters. Most of ours average around 12 per team. And they are referred from all kinds of sources. So they might be referred internally in the school process. So there may be, typically it's a behavior problem. So you'll see kids acting out, and we call it dysregulating, but anyway, acting out, getting in trouble, using their outside words in the classroom, and you know, pushing back on authority and adults. And so typically when we start a team, it's those kids that are the most difficult to deal with, the kids that are acting out the most. And until a school is used to really used to us in understanding mental health issues, they think that behavior problems are mental health problems. And they can be, actually. A kid with a mental illness can act out. But when I lose my keys, I look a lot like a 2-year-old, right? So we all can act out, we all can push back. So it doesn't necessarily mean a kid with a serious behavior problem is mentally ill. But when we normally launch a team or start a team, that's typically we'll get the kids that are acting out the most and the hardest. And then what we find is that if we do a good job with those youngsters, then they will start referring the kids to us that they really like and they're really worried about, and they really understand that these kids are thriving against all odds, or they're not thriving in spite of every advantage, and then they'll start really talking with us about what's ticking in this kid. So one of the criteria nationally, actually, and in Montana, is that the child either has or will be by us diagnosed with what we call a serious emotional disturbance. So in mental health center lingo, SED stands for serious emotional disturbance. In education circles, an emotionally disturbed youngster might be an academic lingo, and it's two correlated things, but they are not the same category. So in Montana, there's a list of diagnoses, mental health diagnoses that a youngster must have to qualify for this program. And it's pretty much anything you can think of that would affect a child's ability to thrive and succeed in their life. And another of the criteria is the child must be having difficulties in more than one realm, which is school and home and community. So some of our youngsters are actually doing just fine at school. But at home and in the community, they're in lots of trouble, and there's conflict and despair and lots of disruption and maybe multiple placements. But at school, they feel pretty secure, so they may not look like we know it doesn't look like mentally ill.
And
At
these kids aren't
school.
all under an IEP and individual.
About 25% of our youngsters also have a correlating IEP, but many of them have an IEP that is related to like a math disability or reading disability. So there's sort of a, go ahead. It's called an individualized education plan, IEP, and they're defined as special ed kids.
Oh,
And that's a whole process that the
That's
school
fine. I
goes through,
just-
you know that.
You know,
Too many lingo, yeah. Then, thank you, stop me anytime. So that was another misperception though, is that kids who are receiving mental health services have special education services, and really only about 25% of our youngsters do. Some have already been identified as emotionally disturbed in the school, but they may not be seriously emotionally disturbed enough to qualify for our services. So it doesn't mean one equals another. So what happens is we'll have kids that are referred to us through parents or teachers, or sometimes the kids refer themselves, or maybe a physician or a therapist or a case manager will just say, would you consider this youngster on your caseload? And so maybe they do, or maybe they don't have a diagnosis. They may not. We have a lot of kids recently referred that are newly poor. So their families don't have a culture of poverty in their family. They don't know how to be poor. So we think of our families like if you gave them a 5-pound bag of flour, they would donate it to Butcher. They would not make bread with it. And so they don't have poverty skills, so a lot of their mental illness in their family will go underground and get pretty severe, and we'll have a crisis before we realize this kid is suffering with depression or anxiety. So that's sort of a new phenomenon right now. I don't know if it's a trend or a peak or a peculiarity of the times. But the newly poor, their children are really suffering and having a hard time because they have a public image and they have a lot of shame related to poverty, where some other families that have cultures of poverty, they know how to be poor and how to call grandma for help or live with a family member or call on friends. It's a little more difficult when people have been able to use financial resources to respond to their life situation. So we'll get referrals. And then we'll meet with the guardian or parent or whoever has authority to consent to care. So it might be a social worker or it might be a birth parent. If it's a foster parent, then we have to have the guardian there as well. So whoever that is, and that would be a great time for you guys to be involved. To sit down and say, what does it look like? What does the emotional distress look like in this youngster? So, so if you're looking at on this right-hand side where it says, show a need for this level of service of problems, managing and or expressing difficult feelings, anger management and or conflict problems, productive problem-solving strategies, depression or chronic sadness, anxiety and or easily overwhelmed, self-esteem, self or body image, trauma reaction or resolution, peer social relationships, and grief and loss. If you looked in the DSM, which is the manual that therapists use to code or categories of mental illnesses, that's what that is. So you'll see trauma, abuse, anxiety, depression, those types of reactions there. So this is just worded in language so that parents can understand and teachers.
How does this program, and you've kind of touched on it, and you may get to it later, interface with a kid who's already in significant therapy otherwise?
Yeah, and we do see that often. The kids we work with have several services running at once. So there's all kinds of ways. It depends on who's doing what. So if a therapist in the community refers a client to us and they're working on it, we're going to consult. We're going to get a release from the guardian or parent or whoever it is, and talk with that therapist and say, now really, what are you working on? So there's sort of a I guess it's going away now, but a misunderstanding that school-based mental health services is for problems at school, and that's not so. But many kids with mental illness have problems at school.
Yeah.
It could be. It might be, that's how we know there's a problem, but they may not be. So I would just call that therapist and say, tell me why you referred, or do you know this child that's been referred, and what are you working on? Because if you think about all the burden on a child, every adult he's in front of or she has an expectation of them. So every teacher has an expectation, every person. So when they get in front of another therapist, they're thinking, great, now I have to be aware of how I manage my mood and how I speak about my feelings and how I manage my behaviors. And when I'm with that therapist, so it could get just way too complex, and then kids give up on therapists. It makes sense. So maybe that person is really working on what we call depth work. So maybe that counselor's working on the trauma experienced or abuse or neglect in the early formation of that child, and what's really happening and why is this behavior expressing itself that way. Or they might be working with the family and saying, how can we support this youngster as they stabilize? Maybe it's a foster home or a kinship home or birth home. What's really going on that we can supplement and support at school. So once in a while they'll say, I just need you to take it. They're just so overwhelmed they cannot keep their appointments. So irregular attendance is producing no results. Or this is really what I want you to do. I'm going to take the family piece. The kid needs his own therapist. Or vice versa. Can you please work with the family? We'll work with the child. So it just depends on what's going on and how many resources are in the school. It just depends. They may also have intensive therapeutic family care in the home too, so they have someone going in and walking beside that parent and teaching them how to be a parent, how to set boundaries, how to discipline, how to communicate. So it's just individual, but we see over half of our kids have more than one service. Or they might have maybe a psychiatrist, ours or another, or a pediatrician is actually prescribing medication. So we'll want to understand what is the target symptom that you are medicating for, so that we can watch and see, is this child having side effects? Are they improving or not improving? So what we're seeing in therapy, does that jive with what we're medicating? And so that we can communicate with that physician and say, yeah, it's working, or what are you thinking? Or like, what's going on? So we set a relationship with that provider as well. That's the only way to do it. So the other part of this admission criteria is we have to have a youngster, excuse me, that is enrolled in this public school, and we like it if they're attending, but often they're not. They're very irregular or school avoidant, or they have reasons why they don't do well at school. So, but we have to have access to them. If you look at the title, it's comprehensive school and community. So there are youngsters who we will actually check in the morning, check in with all of our clients, and then if there's kids that aren't at school, we'll check on that youngster at home or the parent. Sometimes that parent's extremely tired of fighting the fight, and so they've actually excused the kid. But they didn't want to. They're just tired. And my husband and I are therapeutic foster parents, so we do that. We have 3 of our own children too. So, you don't want to fight the fight. So we just agreed maybe we can meet and just talk with the youngster about what's going on at school, or how can we help you get to school. Sometimes we'll set up a check-in, check-out program, and that's a specific model, but all it means is you have an identified caring adult, and it doesn't have to be a therapist or anybody, in the building that checks on you in the morning and through the day, and either winks at you, gives you a high five, or sits down, has lunch with you. Someone that is just aware of you during the day where you can talk to. So we might set up a program like that, or increase therapy or decrease therapy, or if we're pacing a kid too fast in therapy, you'll see that they'll avoid school, or they'll let us know one way or another.
So you actually do with
therapy.
with a number of these kids, not all of them, but
No, all of them.
so they have like a scheduled time during the week that they sit down with the therapist.
Yeah, they get individual, group, and family therapy.
Okay.
And then there's a whole nother section where they get what we call psychoeducation services, but it's social skills. So every child is seen by the therapist at least every week. A lot of kids are seen every day because they're that intense. We're trying to keep them in the community, in a stable environment, and prevent some migration or disruption in the home, ending up in another level of care. So they all have a therapy appointment, And then we have group therapy. Most kids are in 2 groups a week. One is a group therapy run by the therapist, and one is social skills run by the mental health specialist, dealing with relationship issues like communication. Just depends on the age, really. It could be.
And what about like case management? You know, I'm just trying to get the picture of exactly what it is. Do you have a case management function, or you?
The team has a case management function, but several of our youngsters are in wraparound, or they have a case manager. If they have a therapeutic in-home service, that has a case management focus. We call them family coordinators, but they do that piece of making sure everybody's informed on the team and knows what's up and has an opportunity to provide input.
Okay.
So
I'm thinking
the
like
team will do that.
Aware, you know, the case managers are aware. Is your program, I don't know how to say it, a competing program to like Aware, or do you blend somehow together?
Several of our kids have Aware case managers. But Aware does not participate in wraparound, so several of our youngsters have wraparound services as well, very intensive service for families with children at risk. And Aware has 3 programs. They have this program at Bryant, at Central, and C.R. Anderson. So they also have some teams like this.
Okay. That's the other thing I wanted to ask. Are you cited in all of the schools?
We have 11 teams, but we're not in all of the schools. So we have teams at Broadwater, Smith, and we have 2 teams at Rossiter, and we're just starting a team at Fort Georgians. We have 2 teams at Helena Middle School, 2 teams at Helena High School, and 1 team at Capitol High School.
Did you say Bryant too?
No, Aware has Bryant.
Oh, you did, okay.
And I'm not very familiar with how they do it. I know how we do it, but I'm not really,
Okay,
versed in their model.
okay.
But generally, some guidelines. So. And then go ahead.
Kim, what determines which schools you're in?
They interview us. So they go through a selection process, and they interview the providers in the community, and then I'm trying to think. I think I don't know what happens after that. We all get interviewed, and then you get contacted if you're selected.
All right, who
But
is
individual
we all?
schools?
The providers.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
there's 4,
Oh, okay.
and then they interview, and then we get informed if we were selected.
And now, is there any, if you're in the school, you're the only one in the school then? Okay.
Is it individual schools can make that decision, or the school, the district, or?
It's the district and the school, and it's us, because, and I forgot to mention, we have a team at East Valley Middle School, and the Center for Mental Health has 2 teams in East Helena, one at each grade school.
So who are the 4 providers?
In town?
Yeah,
When you said the
that's what I
4
wanted to
providers,
know.
you mean like Aware, Intermountain?
Center for Mental Health, and then Western Montana Mental Health will be a provider here, is what we
Okay,
hear.
so the school district basically decides.
Right, so
which-
school will identify that they want to make room, and their obligation in making room is providing treatment space.
Mhm.
And they don't, it's a very unique, wonderful funding structure. We don't use any general fund dollars, so that's very helpful, and that's part of the very unique braided funding we have with OPI. But the school's commitment is they have to have an in-kind match, so they will provide us with an operating area, phone, printer. We bring our own computers. We have cell phones. We pay for that, and they give us a place to treat kids. So we get an office, and then we get a treating area, which is very difficult for schools because schools are absolutely jam-packed. There's not a square inch anywhere. So when they make a commitment to make way for mental health, they're very committed. But the other part is for us, or I should say for me, but for us at Intermountain, it's very important that when we join a school that we understand what their school culture is, because it's a family. And they've been tending to this issue long before we arrived. And so for me, it's very important that I understand how do they understand emotional distress, how do they understand a behavior disruption, what do they think about mental illness, How do they care for their children? Have they already set up some systems in their school for all children to have fun and to be honored and respected and have a place to fit? That's very important to us. Do they value parents? How do they understand mental illness? And are they truly inviting us to their family? Because it's a very intimate relationship. So we're in classrooms all day long, and we're pulling kids here and there, and going to gym classes, and being on field trips, and so we'll spend a lot of time in the principal's office with our clients. So,
How involved do you get with, how involved, I'm just speaking from the standpoint of an ex-teacher that I sub a lot at the high schools, but I see them there, and they're all wonderful people working with these high school kids, but then my question was in my head, how do they have to try to communicate with every single teacher too, or?
They try to.
Wow, that just seems overwhelming to me when I see all those other kids in the room.
Yep.
But it seems to work really well in keeping the kids,
Centered and
yes,
really,
and focused and all of that. I'm sure the teachers love it, but then I thought, oh my God, do they have to write up things, and how involved do the teachers have to be?
we actually do that part verbal. I mean, there's plenty
Oh.
of documentation. You can imagine any
Yeah.
Medicaid funded program has volumes of paperwork, but we're very relationship based. And so I would rather sit down with the teacher and say, here's what we're working on, here's who I am. All my staff have cell phones, and they text and they find each other, so you can call me at any time. If you can't find my staff, call me. I will drive to that school. And we really want to understand what do you want from it. So some teachers will say, if I call you, you walk in my room, you come straight to me. I want you to talk to me. I want to tell you what's going on, and I want to tell you what I want you to do. Other teachers will say, if I call you, you already know, like, just come in and tend to it. You'll know when you walk in the room who I'm calling for. And we only work with the children on our caseload. So, but we have school district name badges, so it just says our name. It doesn't say, hi, I'm the mental health worker and this job. And with the inclusive nature of at least the school district, there's people in and out of classrooms all day long.
Yeah.
So far, we worried about stigma. Stigma really is the adult issue. It's not the kids. They're used to integration by now, and they aren't feeling stigmatized. And, every now and then kids do, but they feel stigmatized for a lot of reasons, or they set themselves up to be a target of attention, and then they're not liking that. So, like, we might, if this was a math class and you're all working on a worksheet, maybe you're my client, so I might be here just helping you not do your math, but you're regulating anxiety, tolerating failure, asking for help, avoiding distraction, managing the way that you express your frustration. So I know that's your treatment plan, but you might need help with math. So I might reach over and just help you as a courtesy. But I'm not going to talk to you about mood regulation and your mouth, right? So we're not discriminatory, and we're very, very discreet. But we're in all the areas that they are in. That's their life. So about a half of the time we are in their world, walking beside them. So the team will take a look at their caseload, and they'll see where kids combine and where they are and who needs what. Usually math class is kids need help in math class. But 7th grade dancing class in gym, let me tell you. That's a high needs class. So, yeah, 7th graders to touch each other, that's hard. So it just depends on what the youngsters need. And so we might be in multiple classes all day long. We're just roving all day. And then we intersect with each other several times a day to say, how's it going? What do you need? Who's in trouble? Can you call this mom? Or, it just depends on where we are. And then every child has their scheduled time, and then they have their group therapy time and their social skills. Now, not every child needs social skills or needs group therapy. We would prefer that they have group therapy because of the developmental stage that they're in, and chronological age. So try to get that. But we have to work very hard with their teachers because what we do generally is we'll rotate. So group is first period week 1, second period week 2, third period we go up to 8. So in 8 weeks you miss one class out of that one day. So you're not totally being pulled out of math class and being expected to learn math or whatever, gym or whatever. And so we have to coordinate schedules, and then we work with the building administrators too to say, can you arrange these youngsters' study hall? together. So these 4 children are on our caseload, so next semester can they have the same period study home? And so can we join that with a lunch and stay longer lunch and eat lunch together? It depends on the age group as well. The littlers are a little bit easier to gather than the high schoolers who need to be in the room to get the credit for attendance. So it just depends on the need. It also depends on how developed the school is. I don't know if you know about MBI. Do you know about Montana Behavioral Initiative? It's a way of influencing and developing school culture and how we take care of children and how we recognize kids at risk. And so there's several research models out there, and Montana just decided to blend them all in one and just call it Montana Behavior Initiative. And they always have a pyramid. You'll see in any of these models there's a pyramid, and the kids at the top are either the highest risk, or the kids at the top are the top athletes, or if it's academics, the kids at the small top of the triangle are the valedictorian. So it depends on what triangle they're looking at. But if they're looking at mental health, then we'd be top and middle. So when they look at school culture, is there enough opportunities for youngsters to really feel welcome and recognized and comfortable? Are there enough resources for kids to figure out what help looks like or what trouble looks like? Like, is there a fishing club, a bike club, and a football team? Is there an astronomy club and an art club and a dance club? You know, depending on what the passion is of the school. So, and then do we all understand what is problem behavior? So, you know, a kid is lying and manipulating. I'm thrilled. Like, if a kid is lying to me and manipulating me, I'm like, yes, I am important enough to lie to. I am real. And so therapy has begun. I can teach a kid how to manipulate different. We all manipulate. We all try to influence others in our world, right? And they're doing it badly, and it won't work for them in the long run. But I don't mind. So I don't mind if someone's manipulating and they're just trying to get out of something. We can talk about that. I'm just thrilled I'm big enough to be noticed and important enough to try to get worked. I can start there. So schools will see that as, oh great, you know, he swears at me and you go play Uno with him. What's that about? So we have to understand how are we going to respond. You know, some kids will behave if they have something to do with their hands. Others, you just want to sit and talk. Others are we're gonna do laps outside before they're going to talk to me and tell me, you know, why they use that language. So it just depends on the school culture. So that's part of our selection too, is what I was answering is, if the school has a tendency to be a gatekeeper, that's not conducive for our work, because there's nothing in the access criteria that says the school social worker said they could have this service. So I'm very careful about that the school understands that they can't gatekeep. They have to let all referrals come, and then everybody works as a team.
Do you have many ideological conflicts with the teachers?
Mm-hmm.
So I can
Sure.
see that
Sure.
happening a lot.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. And really, when you sit down, our goal really, healthy relationships. So you have to know that that teacher wants the same thing you do. They want their kids to succeed, and they want peace in their classroom. They don't want this child to fail, and they don't want to be sworn at or treated badly or disrespectfully either.
Then where do the ideological conflicts come from?
So they'll determine that a misbehavior is a purposeful, personalized attack with intent and disregard. And I'll say, wow, that looks like a 2-year-old in a 14-year-old body that doesn't trust adults and feels not heard. So somehow we have to go from this is a non-trusting 2-year-old in a 14-year-old body to this is a deliberate little jerk who doesn't have any respect for authority. Somewhere it's all true. And I don't have respect for authority sometimes either. So you have to be able to relate to the child, and you have to be able to relate to that teacher, because they have this huge job. And so we just have lots of conversations about how can we find some common ground, because really what we want is for kids to thrive, really.
And does all the work take place at the school?
No, but we are there 12 months, so let me start there and then get to the nitty-gritty. This school district is incredible because they will all summer long bus the kids in our program to us all summer and on non-school days. So what we do in the summer is the school district cleans out a whole wing of Helena Middle School, And they will then, we operate 10 to 2, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And so the school district buses all those kids to Helen Middle School for all the elementary teams and the middle school teams. They all come there, and then we use, they have school lunch in the summer as well, or sometimes we go to the parks, so they have the K McKenna, you know, fun in the parks, and so they take hot lunch actually to places like Memorial Park, so we will walk over there and have lunch, or we'll pack a picnic and go to Spring Meadow. But once they arrive in the building, then they're ours. So we'll use our vans or our own intermountain transportation, and then we'll embark from there. So sometimes we'll stay there, or sometimes we'll split up and just take one group of kids somewhere and one another, just depending. All of the high school kids don't like to get up at 10 in the morning in the summer. So a little different. So we go get them at noon. And,
I was going to ask if it was pretty consistent with their attendance for the summertime.
Yep. It is actually, it is. But all year long we've been working with them. So they know us, they've had Christmas break with us, spring break with us, non-school days with us. So yeah, we have a pretty consistent, some of the youngsters have to work, when they get to high school they have to work. So they can't always attend. But we always have like good food. So, you know, good pizza. We did get a little critique on our pizza this year. So we do a lot of customer satisfaction, so we asked them, and that was one of the things is you could buy better pizza, which is true, we could. So we will. But
when I asked that question, I was thinking about, you know, do you
Yes.
go into the home?
we do. But it depends on the youngsters. I would like everybody to go to people's homes because I would really like for them to have a feel for this family, and I would like the family to call the shots and be on their turf, instead of having to come to the building. A lot of the kids that we work with and their parents, they've had bad experiences with school, and they don't want to come to the school for therapy. A lot of those parent therapies and family therapies are at the day's end, so the last period of the day, then they leave with their child, or it's after the last period. But if not, you do go to their home. And honestly, maybe 10-15% of the people do we go to their home. But there's reasons for that too. Some will come to us. Some are very skittish. But the reasons, sometimes parents just can't drive, or they have little ones at home and they just cannot, you know, rent a babysitter and then drive and then get back and pay a babysitter. They just don't have that kind of money. Or they have disabilities, or they don't have transportation, so it's not, they just can't.
Is it mandatory at all that the person that's in the school has to see the parent at least once or anything, or are there sometimes the people working in the schools that never see the parents of the kids, ever?
Well, you can't never see because they have to sign forms, and we go over everything every 90 days. We just take a look and just throw it all out on the table. Are we on course? Do we understand the child? Is this what you thought you were going to get? Are we on track? Are you getting better?
How long are you usually with a child in any given situation?
Like a whole length of stay? Like start to finish? Or?
Yeah, or like what would be typical, years, months?
It depends on the diagnosis and the youngster's needs. So if they have a chronic mental illness, like bipolar, that might be hard to manage, and they might be with us 2-3 years. If they have a trauma, and they have a supportive environment, and the family is willing to do the work, that might be a shorter time. That might be a 6-month stay. So it depends really on the child's internal resources. What is their story? I don't know if you know about a study and how trauma, abuse, and neglect affect brain development and then affects attachment and relationship. But what's their story? Did they experience trauma, abuse, and neglect when they were babies? Up to, you know, pre-speech, that's when all those pathways in your brain form. So they're probably going to have more chronic difficulties, and it's going to take a longer time to build trust and resolve those issues. Yeah.
That last part surprised me. I thought we were talking about emotionally disturbed, but it sounds like you're creeping over into areas that are, in a sense, physical disability. Is that true? So you've got kids who...
We don't have very many with a physical disability. It is emotional disturbance, but trauma, abuse, and neglect are the foundation of mental illness in kids. So a lot of kids that we see have had that experience. Some kids have never had that experience, and it's just how their brain's wired. That's their chemistry. They have a mental illness. They have not been traumatized, abused, or neglected, That's their physiological makeup. So you can't conclude that a child with mental illness has experienced trauma, abuse, and neglect, but many have. So we try to figure that out. Is that an issue that needs to be addressed and resolved? You may not ever go directly to that experience in their life, but you have to be sensitive that they may have difficulty being in trusting relationships. They have to manage everything on their own. We do have kids with disabilities, though. Some have very serious health concerns, and most don't, though. But we have our share that do, and that's just part of the child. Maybe their depression is related to their very chronic illness.
I have kids that are real drug and alcohol involved, but it may look like mental illness, but it
You
may
need
be
to tease
both.
that out, yeah. What we do right now is screen for that, and then we have a couple addictions counselors on staff, but we're right now trying to figure out how to do that in Helena because the funding is very funky, and so it's not doable, but there aren't enough resources for kids with drug and alcohol, and we see it all the way up. So, but that's like I'm an addictions counselor, so if we have one of those youngsters where they're trying to tease out, is this kid, using or what's going on, we would really check. We also, in this district, we're lucky enough to have Project Success. Do you know what that is?
A little bit.
Okay. So for those of you that don't, the school district was the recipient 3 years ago of a grant from SAMHSA, which is a federal program called Safe Schools, Healthy Students. So what that is, a $5.3 million grant, and one of the 5 areas that they are working on is influencing substance use and drug and alcohol abuse. And so the 2 middle schools and the 2 high schools have staff that are paid for by the grant. They don't do addictions counseling, but they do some screening and referral. And they work very hard on influencing the school culture again and the belief and value systems of the school, and really being very, very informative of the teachers about what to watch for so that they know what they're looking at. So we all know Monday morning a kid has a headache and is wimpy and their gut is kind of sick on a Monday morning, we better have them screened. They probably took way too much Chlorcidin and Dramamine over the weekend, OTCs, over-the-counter drugs. With acetaminophen, they could be in liver failure. So we know that, and so we would refer that person to Project Success or their parent, or, if we think that a child is really struggling with addictions in home and they're at risk but they're not using, we would refer that as well. So it depends on what's going on. A lot of the older kids who are going to have substance abuse, have charges is what I was going to say, and work with youth court. So they will have some sort of mandate that they must participate or do something. They are drug tested. So it depends on the age and how bad it's gotten. I think it's the weak link. The thing that worries me the most is that we aren't as informed as we could be. We just had 2 overdoses of spice. Do you know what spice is? Synthetic marijuana sold at I forgot the name of the store on down by the railroad.
Oh,
Unique Apparel.
really?
Yeah, it's synthetic marijuana, and it's called spice.
It's legally
It's
sold.
legal. Mm-hmm. Right.
It says, that shop says it's for adults only.
Apparel, yeah.
No, but adults.
Well, they all have an 18-year-old friend, so it's
Is it chemically related to marijuana, or is it just
No,
some
it's synthetic.
produces something that, some sort of effect that's similar?
Yep, similar. What happens is it affects the major muscle groups and they lose their ability to control, like walk or hold things, and they just collapse. But depending on how much they've taken, then it can just continue to affect all muscles. So, yeah, we've had that. And so it's not just drugs and alcohol.
recovery? They recover? I
Yep.
mean, overdoses then.
Right, taken to the ER and then, yeah. So we can last. We have Meow, which is another synthetic bath salts, which is not really bath salts, that's just what they call it. It's inhaled, sold
Have
in
you
little
seen
glass
any of
jars.
that with kids?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Lots.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we certainly see it with parents.
Yeah, yeah. So we just have to always be constantly on the alert for, is this substance, is this mental illness, is this your new medication, or did you borrow your friends? So, yeah, we just stay constantly educated, but I think treatment is very sketchy, so we have to implore funders to pay for it. So luckily we're very good partners with Youth Court, but kids don't always get enough offenses or tickets or charges to receive support from Youth Court. And you don't want to criminalize addictive behavior just so that you can access funding to get treatment. I mean, it's just really
Yeah.
you know, it's a very awkward deal. So you really don't want to do that. But if they've done that and they have the support of a youth court or a juvenile probation officer, then sometimes that's helpful.
What prompted Intermountain to get involved with this?
I did. I was working at Clancy School, and my background is in adolescent addictions and in mental health treatment for kids. And I kept sending children to Intermountain and other programs, and when they came back from Intermountain, they were better, and their families were very engaged and realistic, and they were fresh. And when kids came back from Intermountain, they came with staff and support and instructions and all kinds of advice and collegiality, and they very slowly integrated children back into the public classroom after having been there. So I just kept thinking there has got to be a way to stop. You can't keep building more Intermountains. You can't keep building more therapeutic care. So what can we do? So I knew about this program when it was invented badly. And I had heard that. It could be done well. So so I approached Intermountain, and we worked on making this Intermountains model and really understanding kids and kids' mental illness and working with the school district about in your wildest dreams, so how could this be? So I really think third grade teachers are the key, because by third grade, teachers can tell you which kids are and are not going to make it. It's amazing. So we just went around to all the schools and just said, what would it look like if you had services in your school? What would you like? What would it look like? And then we shaped it to meet the way of funding, which is another question you might have about funding. But anyway, that's how it started. So I was the first therapist, and they were really careful about gender. So we try to have a team with a woman and a man. So that's not always possible. We try that. And so I had Randy Witter help me, and we were the first team at Helena Middle School, and we had a waiting list on the third week. So that was a good sign, and they were very hospitable and very brave, because it's a shift of culture of do you punish children for acting out because they have mental illness, because the kids need accountability and responsibility. I don't get to be abusive because I'm angry and I'm right. Matter of fact, I don't get to be abusive. So how do we understand mental illness? How do we understand acting out behavior, and how do we come together at the table and figure out a way to respond to it? So they were incredibly flexible and hospitable, and so then we took a second team even before our first year, and then it just kind of caught fire, and other schools came to visit and asked us to come talk to them, and so that's kind of how it took off. Yeah.
So you're dealing with a defined percentage at any given moment, because you only accept 12 kids per team.
No, we would take more. We're just not going to do it badly.
Right.
So, and it is somewhat limited. So, if the child has Medicaid funding, which many of them do, Medicaid pays for the minutes or time served by either staff. So the therapist or the specialist, we can bill Medicaid for the time that we are face-to-face with a youngster. So a lot of our youngsters are Medicaid. I don't know if that's by design or prayer that we can fund our program, but a lot of kids are Medicaid. So Medicaid says that we can bill per two-person team 720 15-minute units total. We can decide how that's metered out and dosed out.
Total over what period?
Over one calendar.